My name is Nellie, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the afterthought in my family. Growing up, it was always about my younger sister, Emma, the golden child, the shining star, the one who could do no wrong. Emma was the daughter my parents had always dreamed of having. Me. I was the awkward one, the bookworm, the girl who'd rather solve math problems than socialize at parties. Don't get me wrong, I loved learning and was good at it, but in a family that valued charm over intellect, I might as well have been invisible. I remember one particular day when I was 12, and Emma was 10. We were at a family barbecue, and I had just won a regional spelling bee. I was bursting to share the news with anyone who'd listen. Mom, Dad, guess what? I ran up to them, certificate in hand. I won the spelling bee. My mother glanced at me, her eyes quickly darting back to Emma, who was doing cartwheels on the lawn. That's nice, dear, she said distractedly. Emma, sweetie, be careful. You might get grass stains on your new dress. I stood there, certificate crumpled in my fist, watching as relatives cooed over Emma's athletic prowess. No one asked about my achievement. No one cared. Our parents' favoritism wasn't subtle. Emma got new clothes, I got hand-me-downs. Emma got dance lessons, I got library cards. Emma got praise and attention, I got used to disappointment. As we grew older, the pattern continued. Emma blossomed into a beautiful teenager, popular and vivacious. I retreated further into my books and numbers, finding solace in the worlds where merit mattered more than charm. Nellie, why can't you be more like your sister, became a common refrain in our household. It was usually followed by, Emma, darling, you're perfect just the way you are. I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself that one day, my hard work and intelligence would pay off. One day, I'd show them all that I was worth something too. As I entered high school, I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor. I was determined to excel, to make achievements so impressive that even my parents couldn't ignore them. But as it turned out, I was fighting a losing battle against the golden glow of Emma's popularity. In my junior year, I reached what I thought would be the pinnacle of my academic career. I won the state math competition. It was a grueling contest, pitting the brightest minds against each other in a battle of numbers and logic. When they announced my name as the winner, I felt a surge of pride and hope. Finally, I thought, I've done something truly extraordinary. I rushed home that day, trophy in hand, eager to share the news with my family. But as I burst through the door, I was met with the usual scene, my parents hovering around Emma, who was trying on a new costume. Mom, Dad, guess what? I said, breathless with excitement. I won the state math competition. My mother glanced up, a distracted smile on her face. Oh, that's nice, dear, she said. Emma, honey, turn around, let's see how it looks from the back. My father didn't even look up from adjusting Emma's costume. Good job, Nellie, he said. Emma, are you sure this is the right size? It seems a bit tight around the shoulders. I stood there, trophy in hand, feeling utterly deflated. But it's the state competition. I beat out hundreds of other students. That's great, sweetie, my mother said, not really listening. Emma has a big performance this weekend. We need to make sure everything's perfect. And just like that, my moment of triumph was overshadowed once again by Emma's latest endeavor. I retreated to my room, placing the trophy on my desk where it gathered dust, unnoticed by anyone but me. When it came time for college applications, I poured my heart and soul into every essay, every form. I was determined to get into the best school possible to prove once and for all that I was worth something. The day the acceptance letters arrived was one I'll never forget. I'd been accepted to a prestigious university with a full scholarship to study financial analysis. My hand shook as I read the letter, tears of joy and relief streaming down my face. I found my parents in the living room, Emma sprawled across the couch between them. I got in, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. Full scholarship to study financial analysis. Oh my God! Emma suddenly shrieked, jumping up from the couch. I forgot I need a new costume for my performance next week. And just like that, the spotlight shifted. My parents leaped into action, grabbing their keys and wallets. I stood in the empty living room, acceptance letter clutched in my hand, listening to the sound of the car pulling out of the driveway. They didn't come back until late that night, arms laden with bags full of Emma's new costume and accessories. My acceptance was never mentioned again. I threw myself into my studies at 5:30. University. Emma's life took a different turn. She enrolled in the local community college, more focused on her social life than her academic pursuits. It wasn't long before she started dating John, her high school sweetheart. I immersed myself in the world of financial analytics, finding a sense of purpose and validation I'd never experienced before. For once, my intelligence and work ethic were recognized and appreciated. I made a few close friends who shared my passion for numbers and analysis. It felt like I was finally where I belonged. Meanwhile, back home, Emma's life was progressing exactly as our parents had always dreamed. She married John right after graduating from college in a lavish ceremony that my parents spared no expense for. I stood by as a bridesmaid, feeling like an outsider in my own family once again. Within a year of their marriage, Emma announced she was pregnant. The day she gave birth to him, you'd have thought the sun rose and set on that delivery room. My parents were beside themselves with joy. "We're grandparents," my father kept saying, his eyes misty with tears. "Can you believe it, Nellie? Aren't you excited to be an aunt?" I was happy for Emma, truly, but I couldn't help but feel the sting of being overlooked yet again. I had just landed a job at one of the most prestigious financial firms in the city, but in the face of Emma's new motherhood, it seemed insignificant. When Anthony was born 2 years later, the cycle repeated. Emma was the perfect daughter with the perfect family, and I was just Nellie, the one who worked too much, who didn't date enough, who didn't give them grandchildren to dote on. By the time I turned 30, I had worked my way up to senior financial analyst. I was respected by my peers, sought after by clients, and finally feeling a sense of self-worth that had eluded me for so long. To celebrate my success, I decided to buy myself a house. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom home in a great neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was mine, bought with my own hard-earned money. The day I got the keys, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that I'd never experienced before. Excitedly, I invited my family over to see my new home. I thought, finally, they'd see what I'd achieved, that they'd be proud of me. They arrived, Emma with her kids in tow, my parents cooing over their grandchildren. As I gave them a tour of the house, my mother's main comment was, "It's such a big house for just one person, isn't it?" I felt my heart sink. "It's an investment," I tried to explain. "And I have room for a home office now." "Well, I suppose that's sensible," my father said, but his tone suggested he found it anything but. "Emma, honey, make sure Lily doesn't touch anything. We don't want to break Aunt Nellie's things," my mother said. As they left, I overheard my mother saying to Emma, "It's a shame Nellie doesn't have a family to fill that big house, but I suppose her career is important to her." A few months after I'd settled into my new home, I received an unexpected invitation to a family dinner. I was surprised, to say the least. My family often forgot to include me in gatherings, dismissing me as strange and uninteresting. Nevertheless, I accepted, hoping that perhaps things were changing. "Nellie, good of you to come," my father said, patting my shoulder awkwardly. "Have a seat. We have something important to discuss." A knot formed in my stomach. Important discussions in this family usually meant something good for Emma and something disappointing for me. Still, I sat down, forcing a smile. We ate dinner, the conversation revolving around Emma's kids and John's job. I tried to mention a successful project I had just completed at work, but my words were drowned out by Anthony's sudden wail for more dessert. After dinner, as we settled in the living room, my mother cleared her throat. "Nellie, dear, we've been thinking." I braced myself, unsure of what was coming. "You're single, with no children," she continued, her tone suggesting this was some kind of terminal illness. "And you have that big house all to yourself." "Yes," I said slowly, not liking where this was going. My father jumped in. "Well, we think it would be best if you gave your house to Emma and her family." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Give them the keys and move out," my mother clarified, as if she were asking me to pass the salt. "They need the space more than you do." I looked around the room, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was all a joke. But all I saw were serious faces. Emma sat looking smug, while John patted her shoulder condescendingly. "You're joking, right?" I finally managed to say, "Now Nellie," my mother said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. "Don't be selfish. Emma needs her own space more than you do. You're just one person, after all. It's your sisterly duty," my father added as if that settled everything. Family helps family. I felt like I was in some kind of twisted alternate reality. "But it's my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I bought it with my own money. I worked hard for it." "Oh, come on, Nellie," Emma chimed in, her voice sickly sweet. "You know how hard it is raising 2 kids in our small apartment. You'd be doing us such a favor." I stood up, my hand shaking. "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Absolutely not. I'm not giving you my house." The room erupted. My parents started listing all the sacrifices they'd supposedly made for me over the years. Emma went on about the difficulties of raising children. John sat there, nodding along as if this whole scenario was perfectly reasonable. As I walked out, I heard my mother call after me, "Think about it, Nellie. Don't be selfish." In the days following that surreal dinner, my life turned into a circus of unwanted attention. It seemed my parents had spread the tale of my selfishness far and wide among our extended family. Suddenly, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years became experts on my life, bombarding me with calls and messages. One afternoon, I picked up a call from my great-aunt, a woman I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. "Nellie," she cooed into the phone, "I heard about your situation. How could you be so heartless? You're nothing but an old maid saving money for no good reason." The next day, my cousin Mike, whom I barely knew, sent me a text. "Hey Nellie, heard you're being difficult. Why don't you just move to a remote island and live as a hermit? You're already an outcast and a loner anyway." 2 weeks after the disastrous family dinner, I found myself at home, nursing a bad cold. As I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot tea, I heard an odd noise coming from my front door, a distinct sound of someone fumbling with the lock. My heart began to race. Was someone trying to break in? I set my tea down quietly and crept towards the door, my legs shaking beneath me. Pressing my eye to the peephole, I nearly gasped out loud. There, on my front porch, were my sister, my parents, and John. Emma was kneeling by the lock, a hairpin in her hand, while my parents kept watch. John stood a little way back, looking nervous. Without thinking, I yanked the door open. They all jumped back, startled, expressions on their faces. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice hoarse from my cold but filled with anger. For a moment, they all stared at me, caught red-handed. Then, to my utter disbelief, my mother spoke up. "We thought you'd be at work. We were just going to move in." "Move in?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean break in and squat in my house?" "Now, Nellie," my father interjected, "we knew you wouldn't have called the police on us. We're family, after all." I looked past them and saw a car parked in my driveway, loaded with boxes and suitcases. They had actually planned to move in behind my back. "Get off my property," I said, my voice low and dangerous now, "or I will call the police." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, holding it up so they could see. "Last chance," I said. "Leave now." They stared at me for a long moment, disbelief written across their faces. Then, slowly, they began to retreat. I watched them drive away, my whole body shaking. Once they were out of sight, I closed the door, locked it, and slid down to the floor, my back against the solid wood. The very next day, I contacted a security company and had surveillance cameras installed around the perimeter of my property. These weren't just any cameras, they came with a voice recording function. But technology alone wasn't enough. I'd always wanted a dog, and now I had the perfect reason to get one. I headed to the local animal shelter, determined to find a companion who could also serve as a guardian. That's where I met Maximum. He was a large mixed-breed dog with intelligent eyes and a wary demeanor. The shelter worker told me his story. He'd been abandoned by his previous owners for being too protective. I saw past his gruff exterior to the loyal, loving dog underneath. Max and I bonded quickly. At home, he was gentle and affectionate, always by my side. But when strangers approached the house, he transformed into a vigilant guardian, his deep bark a warning to anyone who might think of trespassing. I set up a beautiful kennel in the backyard for Max, complete with a cozy doghouse and plenty of toys. He seemed to love it. It often lounged in the sun-dappled grass when he wasn't patrolling the perimeter. For 2 months, life was peaceful, but a work emergency called me out of town for a weekend. I was reluctant to leave, but my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, assured me she'd take good care of Maximum. She adored him, often bringing him treats and taking him for walks when I worked late. I left feeling relatively at ease. But on the second night of my trip, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Johnson, and she sounded frantic. "Nellie dear, there's been an incident," she said, her voice shaking. "Max, he bit the stranger, chased them right out of the yard and down the street. The police are here now." I caught the first flight back, my mind whirling with possibilities. When I arrived home, I was met with a scene straight out of my nightmares. My parents' car was parked in front of my house. Emma was there, looking both angry and smug. And to my horror, there were 2 police officers standing in my driveway. I approached cautiously. "What's going on here?" One of the officers stepped forward. We've had a complaint about your dog attacking someone. Can you tell us what happened?" Before I could respond, Emma cut in. "Her monster of a dog attacked my husband. Jumped right over the fence and bit him. He could have been killed." Suddenly everything clicked into place. The bite, it had been John. "That's not true," I said firmly. "My dog was protecting my property from intruders. If your husband was bitten, it's because he was trying to break into my house." Emma's face turned an ugly shade of red. "Liar. Put that beast down before it hurts someone else." My parents, who had been oddly quiet, now chimed in. "We'll be pressing charges," my father said, a gleam in his eye. "You'll have to pay for John's medical bills, of course." The officer looked between us, clearly sensing the family tension. Due to the complaint, we're going to have to take your dog to the kennel for evaluation. If he's deemed aggressive, he may have to be put down." My heart sank as I watched Animal Control load Max into their van. He looked at me with confused, sad eyes, and I felt tears well up in my own as the officers and Animal Control drove away. My mother approached me in a low voice. "You know, Nellie, all of this could have been avoided if you'd just given us the house. It's not too late. Give us the house, and we'll drop the charges. Otherwise, well, you know what happens to aggressive dogs." As I stood in my driveway, watching my family drive away with smug satisfaction, a sudden realization hit me like a bolt of lightning: the security cameras. I rushed into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands shook as I booted up my laptop and accessed the security footage from the previous night. As the video began to play, I held my breath, praying that the cameras had captured what I needed. The footage was crystal clear. I watched as Emma and John crept up to my front door, looking furtively over their shoulders. Max appeared on screen, his hackles raised, a low growl emanating from his throat. Then I heard Emma's voice, clear as day. "John, kick the dog when it bites you. We can accuse Nellie and demand compensation, or better yet, we can get the whole house in exchange for the dog's life." I felt sick to my stomach as I watched John cruelly kick Maximum. The dog, surprised by the sudden attack, latched onto John's leg in self-defense. Emma let out an ear-piercing scream, causing Max to release his grip immediately. The 2 of them ran away, leaving Max looking confused and distressed. The next morning, I called my parents, keeping my voice steady. "I think we need to have a serious conversation. Can you all come over to my house?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, then my mother's voice, sickly sweet. "Of course, dear. We'll be right over." An hour later, they all arrived, my parents, Emma, and John, his leg conspicuously bandaged. As they filed into my living room, I could see the triumph in their eyes. They thought they had won. Emma immediately began to wander around the room, pointing at various items. "We'll need to get rid of this ugly lamp," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "And this couch simply won't do. We'll replace it with something more family-friendly. I bit my tongue, letting her continue her presumptuous tour of my home. Finally, I cleared my throat. Before we discuss anything, I said, my voice calm despite the anger boiling inside me. I think you should watch something. I gestured towards the large TV mounted on the wall. Please have a seat, all of you. Confusion flickered across their faces, but they complied, settling onto the couch. Emma perched on the armrest, a look of irritation on her face as the security footage played on the screen. I watched the color drain from my family's faces. Their expressions morphed from confusion to shock and finally to horror as they realized their scheme had been caught on camera. Emma was the first to break the stunned silence. It was just a prank, she sputtered, her voice shrill with panic. We didn't mean any harm. John nodded vigorously, wincing as the movement jostled his injured leg. Yeah, just a joke that got out of hand. No need to make a big deal out of this, right? My parents, however, seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. My father leaned forward, his face ashen. Nellie, sweetheart, let's not be hasty. There's no need to make this public. We can work this out as a family. I couldn't help but smile, a cold, humorless expression that made them all flinch. It's a bit late for that, don't you think? I said, glancing at my watch. And speaking of late, I believe we have some guests arriving. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to reveal 2 police officers, whom I had called earlier that morning. Perfect timing, I said, ushering them in. Officers, I have evidence of an attempted break-in and a malicious attempt at blackmail. What followed was a flurry of activity. I explained the situation to the police, showing them the damning security footage. They listened gravely, then moved to detain Emma and John as the officers read them their rights. My parents broke down in tears. Nellie, please, my mother sobbed. Don't do this, we're family. I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was quickly overshadowed by years of pent-up hurt and resentment. You should have thought of that before you tried to steal my home and hurt my dog, I said coldly. I think it's time for you to leave. They left in tears, following behind as Emma and John were escorted to the police cruiser. That evening, with a weight lifted off my shoulders, I went to the animal shelter to bring Max home. He was overjoyed to see me, his tail wagging furiously as he covered my face with kisses. Let's go home, buddy, I whispered, hugging him tightly. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Emma and John were arrested and stood trial. With the clear evidence from my security cameras, they were found guilty of attempted breaking and entering, as well as attempted blackmail. They were slapped with a hefty fine, which was awarded to me, and given suspended sentences. I made the decision to cut off all communication with my immediate family. However, I felt it was important that the rest of the family knew the truth. I sent a detailed account of what had transpired, along with copies of the security footage, to all our extended relatives. The response was overwhelming. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had once berated me for my selfishness now sent messages of support and apology. My parents, Emma, and John found themselves ostracized from family gatherings, their actions deemed unforgivable by even the most forgiving relatives. As for me, life took a turn for the better. I continued to excel at my job, finding more satisfaction in my work than ever before. Max and I settled into a comfortable routine, enjoying long walks in the park near our home. It was on one of these walks that I met Greg, a kind-hearted software engineer with a golden retriever named Luna. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of dogs and our similar experiences with different families. We exchanged numbers and began dating, our relationship blossoming with